This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is September 2nd, 2021, and this is episode 255.
I'm Stuart Lunderboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, the first two Liberal premiers of BC are up in the greatest BC premier bracket, which is just perfectly fitting given we have the federal Liberal platform to dig into this week. But before we do that, and before we thank those who keep the show going, a special announcement. Next week is the federal election English language debate. Tonight was the French one. We didn't watch it.
Tonight was the TVA debate,
right?
Which is not the kind of official debate commission debate. That's actually happening on Wednesday, September 8th, so the day before the English language debate.
Yes, so next Thursday is the official English language debate, the only English language debate, because the leaders are all much more willing to debate, mostly Trudeau willing to debate in French for the Quebec audience, where more votes are up for grabs versus it's just too risky for him to talk English.
So they actually put in a debate commission after 2015, and it has been such a disappointment. We're getting one debate. If it's anything like the 2019 one, it's going to be pretty terrible and a lot of shouting over each other. If you're going to do that, could we at least, I don't know, have something like we had in 2015 where we actually got, was it 4 debates overall?
So that
was a long election, and I think dragged on longer than anyone wanted, but the debates were definitely a better part of that, or one of the highlights of it.
So presuming the debate is disappointing next week, it's during our regular recording time on Thursday evening, but it should be done about 8 p.m. local here on the West Coast. And so we're going to jump over to a live stream and do our regular episode as a reaction episode at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. Details will be in the Slack. They'll be on our website at politicos.ca/debate. I'll try and make sure that's a real page by the time this episode is out. And it'll be probably streamed on our YouTube channel. But again, go to politicos.ca/debate, look at our Twitter profile, and that's where you'll find the details for how to watch us. 8:30 p.m. next Thursday.
We'll also post it to the Facebook page that has not, I don't think it's had anything posted to it in like 6 months.
Maybe I'll do Instagram too.
We'll throw it up there.
And so watch us next week, Thursday, 8:30 p.m. But thank you everyone who contributes via Patreon to keep this show going. You can join them at patreon.com/Politicoast. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to politicstoday.news/free-trial. Let's jump quickly through this week's matchup of the greatest BC premier bracket. As mentioned last week, we're just going to do one a week. I think the election is on, or there's lots of other news. Last week's contest was the first two Conservative premiers in the province, William John Bowser and Simon Fraser Tolmie. Not the first Conservative premiers, but actually the last two Conservative premiers. Bowser served very briefly and Tolmie destroyed the party forever. Tolmie wins 8-4. Not many votes in that round. Not very great premiers, though. But maybe Tolmie will take it. I do think he deserves credit for destroying the Conservative brand in this province forever. This week's challenge is the first two Liberal premiers. We have Harlan Carey Brewster versus John Oliver. Not the TV John Oliver. We had our own one.
Just a different British John Oliver.
Yeah, this one was a farmer. So Harlan Brewster was the 18th premier from November 23rd, 1916 till March 1st, 1918. He was the first Liberal premier of BC. He defeated the Bowser Conservatives in a huge upset, winning 50% of the vote and 36 of 45 seats. He had to cut spending and raise taxes to balance the budget. He really had to deal with, if you'll remember, the Bowser machine and the corruption related to it. So he worked against a lot of that. He tried to improve relations between workers and business by creating a Department of Labor. He brought in women's suffrage, so women got the vote in April 1917, thanks to Harlan Brewster's administration, and he named the first women to government posts. He also brought in prohibition, so that sucked, but was popular at the time. He did 80 bills in his first session, and then he died only a year and a half into his mandate. He was 48 and he was returning from Ottawa, where he had been repeatedly going to discuss the war efforts, the First World War. And he died of pneumonia and died in Calgary on his way home.
1918 and pneumonia. Huh. It's almost, gotta wonder if it's that pandemic.
I did have to check if he was racist because I'm trying to figure out if we've had a non-racist premier yet. And as far as I can tell, Brewster didn't do much racism as premier, but he did campaign against Japanese immigration while he was an opposition leader.
He was succeeded by John Oliver, who was the 19th premier from March 6th, 1918 to August 7th, 1927. Like you mentioned earlier, he was a farmer and had the nickname Honest John. Apparently really stuck to that kind of plain-spoken, somewhat rural affect throughout his entire time as premier.
Biographies I was reading really describes it. He was one of the first and quintessential, like, Western Canadian, they describe it as British Columbian, but I think Western Canadian, like, populist, small-town farmer premiers. The kind who was soft-spoken. This guy wore tweed suits and heavy boots as premier. He was in power for a decade, which is, I think, the longest-serving premier we've had to date in our bracket. He did a lot to try to bring reforms into the province. I don't think he did 80 bills in one session, but over the span of a decade did manage to improve labor rights in a few ways. He really had to deal with the aftermath of the First World War, though, so there was a lot of pressures from just returning soldiers for that.
Yeah, also part of the long tradition of Western premiers being angry at Ottawa. He hoped that the Liberal governments in Ottawa would be sympathetic to their concerns, and they were not at all. So he ended up pretty much running against Ottawa in that time-honored Canadian tradition in a couple of his elections. Not all of them successful. In the 1924 election, him and the three other leaders all lost their seats. He was able to get back in shortly after in a by-election.
Yeah, they managed to win a minority of 23 seats to 17 for the Conservatives, with the Provincial Party, which is a weird business class of Vancouver offshoot, and the Labour Party, which is a precursor to
the Free Enterprise Coalition.
Yeah,
almost.
It looked like, I was going to write more about it. It was like Charles Tupper and McRae and a bunch of millionaires in Vancouver who just wanted to run the province like business. Oliver muddled through a minority and eventually managed to spring an election and get a majority out of it, something the federal Liberals are trying to do now. And in the last session, before he also died in office, this time at 71 years old of cancer, John Oliver passed the Old Age Pension Act, which was seen as one of his greatest achievements in terms of social reforms for the province. So left quite the legacy. I do really love this quote of his Fight Ottawa battle cry, where he said, "I've never advocated separation, but if the grossly unjust treatment Western Canada is subjected to in favor of Eastern interests is to be continued indefinitely, then I do not want to call myself a Canadian." Just like Jason Kenney level quote right there.
Like I said, it's a long and storied tradition.
So yeah, I really like this contest. These are both interesting men.
Yeah, something I found interesting reading through the electoral history is that he actually ran in multiple ridings of both Delta and Victoria, which I did not know you could do at some point in BC history. So he ended up winning both of them in one of those elections and decided, I'm going to represent Victoria, which I guess meant there was a by-election in Delta.
Yeah, before a lot of our traditions and rules were really cemented in law, I think that was a sort of common practice for party leaders just to guarantee they would get a seat. I think a few of the previous premiers we've profiled did that, and they would run in multiple ridings, or they would be a MP and a premier at the same time. Fun stuff. Sometimes the work was easier back then, maybe. Anyway, go to politicos.ca/bracket and vote. It's also now on our Twitter, @PoliticosPod, just to make the poll votes a little easier. I didn't like the system I was using. So vote between Harlan Brewster, and John Oliver.
Okay, let's switch gears to the federal election with our main segment. We're halfway there. Whoa, campaigning on a prayer. So we're at the halfway point in the federal election.
You wouldn't know it looking around my suburb. There are 2 lawn signs in the entire neighborhood. Both are conservative. This is a liberal-held riding.
One that's a likely pickup for
It's
another party.
potentially a 3-way race. Like the NDP slipped a few points. I'm in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. The NDP...
Can't recall if in 2019 the most competitive riding in Canada was, I think it was either that one or its neighboring riding. Like that's definitely swing territory.
Yeah, I think Port Moody Coquitlam is a little bit closer, but yeah, both of these are like
that's the one.
tight 3-way races between the major parties, and there's no Green candidate in either of these, which adds an extra bit of intrigue, I would say. But like I said, no lawn signs. It's so weird going around in the middle of an election and not seeing lawn signs everywhere.
So they're starting to pop up here in Vancouver East. I saw the shocking thing of actually running into a Liberal lawn sign somewhere. It's the only one I've seen today.
In the Sea of Orange.
They're writing everything else is Jenny Kwan signs.
I respect people who are willing to put their colors out there when they're not the popular ones.
Yeah, it would be nice to live in a competitive riding.
But many people have much less competitive races this time. Or I guess it might be more competitive but less choice, as the candidate totals are out this week. And, well, the Liberals and NDP have full slates and the Conservatives are one short of a full slate. Oh, and the Bloc also technically has a full slate. The Green Party didn't quite get there this time.
Yeah, they have not been particularly well organized, which I think anyone who's listened to our podcast for the last half year is not finding surprising at all. So they managed to post a total of 252 confirmed candidates as of the deadline. Actually, not even as of the deadline. That's how many they got in by the deadline. It took a couple days or so to actually get that total squared away and them actually come out and say that, which alone is not a great sign that they did not have that information readily available.
I know I went to their website a day or two after the candidate deadline, and I just counted how many were there, and it was like 30 less than that. So they had more candidates than even they knew, at least.
Just a wonderfully organized campaign.
Compare this to the fact that People's Party of Canada are running 312 candidates. They had been bragging about 320, so they didn't quite get there, but 312 is a lot of cranks, racists. Thankfully, maybe they'll make a little bit of a difference in some of the tighter races, but I think the bigger effect will be the Greens not existing in a significant number of races, including here in BC, where you think they would have their base.
Yeah, at least definitely Southwest BC. I don't have the full list of ridings in front of me, but yeah, if they have any gaps in kind of southern Vancouver Island, they should be kicking themselves for that, for sure.
I should note the one Conservative who has withdrawn was a Atlantic Canadian candidate who was facing sexual misconduct allegations. He denies them, but decided to pull his name out, or was asked to pull his name.
I believe was resigned from the ticket, which is in stark contrast to how the Liberals are handling their particular scandal of the same vein.
Yeah, they have a candidate in... Is he a candidate or is he an MP? Yeah.
He's an MP. He was elected in 2015. Raj Saini?
Candidate for Kitchener Centre, who's seeking his third term, but he's got a series of allegations of inappropriate behavior towards young female staffers over his 6 years, but the Liberal Party is standing by him.
So the Trudeau's zero tolerance policy turns out to be, we'll tolerate it if we want your
seat.
seat.
The Liberals are the most tolerant party. It's the Conservatives who are intolerant, Scott. You just generally want to not tolerate pervs and creeps and people who harass.
Yeah, so they're saying the Liberals are hypocritical on stuff like New Ground at all. This, how they've come out feels shockingly unsurprising on that.
And the thing is, they've had a number of MPs over the course of the last 7 years of governing, 6 years of governing, where allegations have come out. They've been investigated. The MPs have either resigned or stepped out of caucus pending that investigation, and some of them were not let back into the Liberal Party. Kent Hehr comes to the most prominent mind as one of those who was under investigation. I don't know why they're standing by this guy other than just not wanting to lose a name on the ballot.
Maybe. In the CBC story here, one of the parts of it is that one of the victims is reported to have attempted suicide as a result of this. So, this is really bad stuff. I'm struggling for words here, but it's not great. Any party should have found a new candidate or just taken the L in the riding at this point, and it does seem to be dogging Trudeau going forward, which is something he can ill afford.
Well, to switch gears a little bit, I thought it would be interesting to just run through some of the other parties that are going to be on the ballot, because Eric Grenier helpfully tweeted out the number of candidates for all of the more minor parties that are out there. There are 91 independents. There are 59 people from Parti Libre, which I guess is running in Quebec. I don't know what it's about. There are 36 Marxist-Leninists and 26 communists. And there are 5 ridings where you can have your choice of far-left flavor.
That was my riding last year. Not this time around. I guess the Marxist-Leninists are not as organized as they were last time.
They're still more organized than the commies, though, or than the pure communists. With more candidates. There are 29 people running for the Maverick Party. I'm assuming those are all in Alberta.
Oh, there's probably a few Saskatchewan
might be.
Too.
Oh, they might be sticking to rural constituencies to not risk the Liberals doing an upset in Calgary Centre. The Rhinoceros Party is running 27 candidates. They're back. What I really want to note, though, is the Rhinoceros Party leader, Sebastian Coe-Rhino. His name is actually C.O. Rhino, or is on the ballot as Coe-Rhino. He lives in eastern Quebec, but is running in Regina Qu'Appelle, which is fun because he's also running with 14 independents there, which is a very significant proportion of the number of independents on the ballot. All of these independents, I found the story in the Winnipeg Free Press called Independence Day for Winnipeg Riding that talks about it. I'll link it in the show notes. But basically, Kieran Chouwez was a candidate.
That I don't know Polish that well, but I'm pretty sure that wasn't right.
Fair enough. He was an independent candidate in 2019 when it was Andrew Scheer's riding. He got 78 votes. He was unhappy with how the last 2 federal elections went, so he sued Elections Canada, arguing our elections are unconstitutional. I don't think he won.
I imagine the consequence of winning that one would have been felt slightly more widely than it appears to have been.
So he managed to recruit 14 people, including his brother, from across Canada. It sounds like very few actually live in Regina, and got them all to run in this riding as a statement about democracy or something. And so between him and the Rhino Party, the head of the Rhino, Coe-Rhino, says, "One of my goals is to break the world's record for the longest ballot and for the least votes. I really hope someone gets 0 votes, which would mean no one would like them."
The thing is, there have been elections, not necessarily sure in Canada, but I know there have definitely been elections where people have got 0 votes.
Well, if you don't even live in the riding, it's very likely. So good luck, Regina voters. You won't have the longest ballot ever, though. Remember the 2018 Vancouver municipal ballot, Scott?
Yes, I still have nightmares about that.
That was
there
big.
Was 78 council candidates, like 20-something mayoral candidates, plus park board and whatnot. It was long. It's not quite as long as the ones in the States where they have like 40 ballot propositions and are electing everything from city comptroller up to president.
Yeah, fun times. Aside from the Rhino Party, the Christian Heritage is running 25 people, which is actually low for them. I think they usually run quite a few more. But maybe they went over to Maverick and to People's Party. Libertarians are running 13. Again, a low number. Animal Protection, 10. Pour l'Indépendance du Québec is running 10. The Splinter Separatists, maybe Parti Libre is a different separatist party. I don't know.
Could be. Bloc has softened its separatist stance a bit, and so I could see why some political entrepreneurs are trying to recapture that space. Quebec politics is wacky enough and prone to some idiosyncratic outcomes that I don't necessarily want to say they don't have a shot
and
at that.
And the Marijuana Party of Canada is running 9 people.
Why do they still exist? They were a single-issue party that had their issue handled 2 elections ago.
That's why they're not running too many people. I guess they are concerned about the status of cannabis legislation and that it should be more legal and less run by government monopolies. I'm just skimming their Wikipedia page. So those are your choices on the ballot. You probably have many fewer than that. I don't think I have any interesting candidates on my ballot. I think mine's pretty much just the top line 3 parties.
I have, I'm looking here at the Vancouver East one. I have perennial candidate Boudet, who Vancouver Politics watchers will be familiar with. He's running as a Libertarian in my riding, plus a commie. It is Vancouver East, after all.
Yeah, I have Conservative, People's Party, NDP, and Liberals. Well,
the Greens managed to get a candidate here.
I would hope they could find someone in downtown Vancouver or in central Vancouver. But let's move on to the protests that have dominated the Liberals' media this week, even though they did get their platform out.
Yeah, or at least the kind of the first Friday through, I don't know, about Tuesday or so. Feels dropped off a bit off the radar in the last day and a half.
That's because our attention changed to the protesters moving to the hospitals and yelling about vaccinations.
Yeah, that may be it. Yeah, so I think it was last Friday when this started. A bunch of protesters started showing up at Trudeau campaign events with some very graphic and profane signage and chants on that, including one of Trudeau being led to a noose, which... If they're not getting on an RCMP list for that, I don't know what to think.
It's ugly.
It's bad. It's protests are a thing in politics. These feel nastier than some of those other ones. Although, I wasn't around for the 80s protests, so I can't really say. But they're apparent from people who were. They do say they feel nasty.
Yeah, I saw 1 or 2 tweets trying to go, the Harper era had to deal with people holding signs that said "fuck Harper," and it's like those are crass, but they weren't. No one. I don't recall anyone ever wanting Harper dead.
There was a. I think he got beaten or beheaded or something in effigy at one protest in Vancouver. Which that's probably over the line, but doesn't quite. I don't think anything.
And no one was calling for him to be locked up for sure. It wasn't a continual chant. And that's just become the standard.
I think there was someone who brought a mock guillotine to Queen's Park in a Doug Ford protest. So that's probably the closest analogy. Which, to be clear, is also very out of line. But so these protests dominated the weekend news. The protesters also appeared to be following Trudeau around, or they'd pop up on most of his campaign stops.
Yeah, I don't know what more can be done. I think Trudeau is trying to capitalize on it to say these people are with Erin O'Toole, but Erin O'Toole is correctly distancing the Conservative Party from these people.
Yeah, there was a report at the first protest that a couple volunteers had shown up and they were promptly let go and told never to come back to the campaign. So the Conservatives are handling this well, effectively denouncing it, making it very clear there's no tolerance for any of their campaigners to be involved with it. I don't think it's going to be hugely effective doing the direct tie thing. It probably overall makes Trudeau a slightly more sympathetic figure, does give him a bit of a, this is what I'm running against, or a better contrast point than O'Toole, who's just not the foil the Liberals were hoping to paint him as. The Liberals have been trying to make the vaccine thing a sticking point since the start of it, and they've not had a huge amount of success, and unless the fourth wave really gets bad in the next week or so, I don't think it's gonna be that effective, especially because there was reporting at the end of last week, sometime last week, I think it was after we recorded, but I can't quite recall, that Trudeau sheepishly confirmed at one event that not all of his candidates had completed their vaccinations yet.
That was pretty good.
Which I think takes the wind out of his sails a bit on trying to draw a contrast between his candidates and the Conservative candidates.
Yeah, and the policies they're all standing for on vaccinations are pretty similar. No one is coming out and saying we will force a needle into every Canadian's arm. And the most they have is how much of the civil service should be required to vaccinate, and how much money will they give to the provinces to support vaccination cards, which are already being developed.
Yeah, particularly with particularly with the civil service stuff, there is like barely any daylight between them once you really get into it. Are you emphasizing the vaccine part or the rapid test part of the everyone has to get vaccinated or rapid tested daily? And like that's like quintessential Canadian politics of being very angry about millimeters of difference between the parties.
The big news this week for the Liberals was their platform, but there were a few other things that came out before that. I think the roughest news they've had is for their Vancouver Granville candidate, Tlaib Noor Mohamed, who I don't think is doing interviews anymore for the rest of the campaign. I think he's just going to keep his head down in one of his 20-plus homes.
He doesn't have those 20-plus homes anymore because he flipped them, which is the main story here, that as the Liberals are campaigning on bringing in a flipping tat, the candidate in a fairly high profile in that they are wanting to win back was involved in a series of home flippings, 21 according to News 1130. I've also seen it thrown out there, and I think it was Vancouver's Office. One of the other media places had, I think, 40 as a number. So not entirely sure on that. There seems to be conflicting.
You know what it is
definitely
I think
21.
Rohina Rezel did the work on this, and everyone hates him because he's an asshole. And so no one's crediting him. And no one wants to go to the original source because he's the one who actually spent the money and went through the ownership registry and figured it out. So I think that's why the numbers are unclear. What is clear, or actually not, is whether any of these homes that were flipped were declared Noor Mohamed's primary residence, because he has refused to answer that question repeatedly. Because if they were his primary residence, he does not pay the same capital gains taxes. But it's pretty hard to believe that you had at least 20 homes in, or News 1130 says at least 42 in the actual article itself, since in 17 years. That's a lot of moving.
Oh yeah, the headline and the text of the article is a little out of whack. Yeah, this was clearly a business for him. He made about $4.9 million in the process. Assuming he didn't play fast and loose with the principal residency declarations, it's all above board, but just pretty bad when your party's one of its major plaints is we're going to stop flipping in speculation in the housing market. So this is one of those more kind of against the message scandals than improper behavior scandals.
There's no allegation of criminality or breaking the rules here. There's questions about dotting I's and crossing T's and whether he paid the taxes he should on all of that. And assuming he did, it just goes to a kind of character question. Is this the kind of person the Liberals want to have representing Vancouver Granville? Or more accurately, is this the kind of person voters of Vancouver Granville trust? Noor Mohamed's interesting because he has been around local politics for a while. He was a potential candidate for the Vision Vancouver mayoral nomination in 2018. I think he ran in Vancouver Granville for the Liberals in 2019.
He did. He ended up dropping out of the 2018 race after developing some health issues. Gerald Adams was unable to continue on with that. I'm going to guess his chances of a future mayoral nomination are pretty small after this. This is a quintessentially Vancouver scandal, and it is the sort of thing that local voters are probably not going to look too fondly on.
So Vancouver Granville will be a very interesting race, given I think it's also one of those three-way races now with Jody Wilson-Raybould not running again. And where will all of her voters go?
Yeah, it's been a fairly competitive riding in the past. In the election that Jody Wilson-Raybould won, she won by like a decent margin, but during the campaign leading up to it, it was close enough that a bunch of those strategic voting organizations all miscalled it and encouraged people to vote for the safe bet of the NDP, who I think lost by 10 points or something. But it's going to be interesting to see how it shades out. If I was to put money on it, I'd probably guess an NDP pickup at least this time, and I don't know, may revert to the Liberals if they find a different candidate in 2 to 4 years' time.
Yeah, just for reference quickly, in 2015, Jody Wilson-Raybould got 44%, and the Conservatives and NDP both got about 26%. In 2019, Jody got 33%. The Liberals got Noor Mohammed got 27%, Conservatives 22%, and NDP were down to 13%. But presumably a lot of NDP votes went to Jody. And so who knows what will happen in Vancouver Granville. One thing I know voters do like, though, are puppies. And that's why it was really fascinating and I think good to see Erin O'Toole, of all people, and the Conservatives come out with the Ban the Puppy Mill platform.
Yeah, so this was something he announced on Monday. Like all of the announcements today, that if you dig far enough into the platform, it's in there to pull up the actual text of the policy. But yeah, that was the centerpiece of his Monday's policy announcement and event. I mostly find it interesting politics more than anything else. Everybody likes puppies. It's one of those things that is probably a smart move. One of the challenges Conservatives have had for quite a while is presenting themselves as the happy, fun party that doesn't have too many rough edges, and nothing smooths rough edges off. Like pictures of candidates with dogs and
cats don't work.
Coming out in support of the puppies.
Cats don't work. We learned in previous elections. But yeah, this is an interesting policy because it's one that any party could put out there. There's no partisan angle on do you like puppies and animals. There might be a bit more strong pro-animal rights positions in some more left parties I could see, but I've not seen it recently, to the chagrin of groups like Animal Justice, who are actually quite pleased to see this, despite past criticisms of parties of all stripes. Animals live in a very weird part of Canadian law. They are basically just property. And so anything that can help move animals into where I think most Canadians see them, especially pets, where they aren't necessarily full charter rights beings, but do have some protections in the law that are beyond just vague animal cruelty ones, are good to see.
Yeah, but I don't think this is going to be much of a vote mover, but it is quite interesting strategically because it is kind of a mess or an image type announcement that kind of is there to, like I said, sand off the rough edges of the Conservatives and really help build the idea in Canadians' minds that, yeah, the Erin O'Toole guy, he seems all right and wouldn't be that scary if he was Prime Minister, which is something their campaign has worked really hard on and generally seems to be doing a pretty good job of delivering on.
So that's something that went really well for a candidate this week and for a leader this week. We have a couple stories that we'll run through quickly of things that didn't go as well. First up, Jagmeet Singh goes to Churchill, Manitoba to talk up his relationship with the Indigenous peoples and has a couple local chiefs there to talk about the campaign. And I don't know what went wrong in the planning, but the chiefs, during their speech with Jagmeet Singh right behind them, endorsed the local Liberal candidate over the NDP's candidate, who was Nikki Ashton, former leadership candidate, who was also weirdly not at the event.
So a lot of planning, a lot of kind of advanced planning fails on this one.
I'm going to posit that it maybe wasn't accidental that Nikki wasn't there. I've heard there are not always warm, fuzzy feelings between her and the leadership of the party, given how she tends to be on the more radical edge and critical of the edge of it.
That doesn't entirely surprise me, although she is probably not happy about missing that endorsement as well. It's unlikely she's going to lose the race, but it doesn't reflect great on her, even if she isn't there. Yeah,
the Chiefs specifically decided to back Liberal candidate Shirley Robinson because, in their words, she's an Indigenous person and they would stand beside someone who is Indigenous over someone who is not every day of the week, they said. We want Indigenous people involved in the process, which makes sense. It's just something you think Singh's team would have confirmed before bringing them there. Or maybe it's just a bold how pro-reconciliation Jagmeet Singh is, that he doesn't even care which team you're supporting. He will support you. It's still embarrassing.
it's not great politics. Because the story of the day for the NDP was NDP has their candidate, their leader stand in there with the Liberals get endorsed. I don't think the NDP are that principled that they would purposely walk into something like that. It's almost certainly a case of somebody on the campaign team messed up and didn't know this was going to happen.
It's almost as embarrassing as saying you endorse another party's environmental plan.
Yeah, so this was today from party leader Annamie Paul, who during, I think, one of her stump speeches was talking about how important it is to, have a clean environment, take climate change seriously, all of that stuff, and that is why the Liberal Party of Canada's plan is best one.
She later did a follow-up video saying it's funny to have been made a meme. Obvious.
Was it a meme?
It was tweeted out by Canadian Poly Memes, I think. Or one of those kind of Twitter.
Guess it doesn't really rise to the level of
a
meme.
gaffe.
Yeah, it's a gaffe, yeah.
It's something we will not be talking about in 2 days, and I almost wasn't going to include it in here other than the fact we had a couple other of these kind of stories, and they just go together. It's funny. It was a slip of the tongue. It does highlight that, she chalked it up to having to have to do so many speeches in such a short period of time, but that's one of the key functions of being the leader of a national party.
Yeah, they should have their stump speech memorized. On the other hand, this is the first bit of actual press coverage that they've gotten in a long time, so I don't know, I guess if there's no such thing as bad press, this is technically a win.
It was a psyop opera.
It reminds people that the Green Party of Canada...
The other story they had this week is that they don't have a full slate, so not a great week in that campaign. Back to the NDP, who had another embarrassing photo op when the wheel literally fell off their custom poutine truck that they had put together in Quebec to have Jagmeet Singh deliver Punjabi poutine.
This is the most Canadian of all possible campaign fails, is poutine truck loses a wheel. It's better than the 2019 Liberal bus hitting the Liberal plane and drowning it.
Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah, this one I think, I don't think it reflects badly on the leader at all, unlike the previous two. And this one, I think everyone in kind of the Canadian political discourse space just had a good laugh, and it was a funny moment more than anything else.
Puns off about how tirelessly everyone was working on it.
Those were pretty groan-inducing. I think the truck did eventually make it there, and they had it decked out in NDP colors with the art of Jagmeet with the thing of poutine in his hand.
I would love to try that Punjabi poutine. It sounds delicious. But let's dig into the Liberal platform, and I'm looking at the clock, and wow, we've already run 45 minutes, so let's try and do this in 10 minutes. So here's what I'll say right off the top. The Liberal platform is titled Forward, for Everyone, It's basically the Liberal platform of the last two elections, minus some of the things they've done, which are highlighted as accomplishments, and a couple other things just missing, and a couple new things. Basically, it's, do you like the federal Liberals and what they've been doing? If so, they're going to keep trying to do that. It's like the NDP provincial platform here in BC in 2020, where they basically just said, we just want to keep governing. Only, I think people liked the BC NDP more than they like the federal Liberals right now. And especially when there's a competent alternative choice on the ballot or two.
Yeah, like the 2020 NDP platform, this one spends a lot of time on the backpatting. It feels like about probably a third, although that may be a little high as an estimate, but it feels like 20% to a third of it is basically, hey, this is everything we've done so far, and then there's some other stuff they want to do going forward. Like you said, a lot of it is recycled. They have a pledge in there to hire 7,500 doctors and nurses, which is literally identical to their 2019
Damn,
pledge.
Those would have been helpful if there was a global pandemic in between 2019 and today.
Yeah. So, yes, some of the stuff is literally just dusting off platform promises, which there's always a degree to that. And there's continuity between different platforms the parties put out in different elections. Nevertheless, how closely it taxed is a bit on the nose, particularly in an election where the Liberals are struggling to answer the question of why did you call an election? And after 6 years of governing, people have a pretty reasonable question on, okay, if this stuff's important, why haven't you done it by now? And that may be the sort of thing that people could forgive in a minority government, in a snap election, some of that stuff. But the fact is that because it was called by them opportunistically and not a case, we failed a confidence vote, rings kind of hollow.
What I'll give credit to here is that the Liberals are the first to put out estimates and costing to their platform. I think that's largely because they called the election, so they were able to get the PBO working on these kind of platform promises in advance.
The PBO actually doesn't start storing any of these until the election's officially called. So they may have had the submissions lined up to hit send on the email the first day, which may be the only thing they got organized for the first day. But yes, so the PBO actually has all the platform stuff that they've been asked to look at, that they've sent to the party, and that the parties agreed to release publicly. Those kind of the 3 steps in this. And right now on the PBO website, there's 11 Liberal Party platform plans up there and 1 NDP one. So it's hard to say if the Conservatives just haven't sent anything to PBO, or if it's a case that PBO is still working through everything the Conservatives have, or what.
Let's dig into some of the actual meat, though. I think we can save talking about the numbers, the costs, until we have something to compare with, because this is basically just like they're going to spend a little bit more and also tax a little bit more than they put in budget 2021. So it's those numbers, but with bigger numerators and denominators. It's an 80-page document. There's a lot in here. Like we said, a lot of it's repeated. It starts off on COVID, everything you'd expect. Everyone will get their booster shot for free, as though that was a question.
Well, that was the thing I actually picked out of there that I was not expecting. So most of the rest of the COVID stuff is all the stuff we talked about. Some of the stuff we even mentioned earlier in the podcast around mandatory vaccinations and supporting provinces in developing vaccine passports. The COVID booster thing is interesting because the U.S. is just starting to talk about it. I think 1 or 2 provinces, I think it was Alberta last week, started to put in place plans to give boosters to elderly and immunocompromised people, basically third doses.
BC is getting there too.
Yeah, BC started to make noise in the last couple of days on that as well. But this is, I think, the first sign from the federal government we've seen that they're actually a federal government, or a potential federal government's actually seriously contemplating this.
And the rest of it on COVID is, like we said,
exactly what you'd expect.
And they would put in place a new law to prevent legal challenges to businesses who ask for proof of vaccination, which sounds nice. Protect people who want to require proof of vaccination. I don't know exactly how that would work. That's a question for lawyers.
Yeah, I have questions about how that works federally.
The other thing people have questions about how it would work is the flipping tax, which PBO costed it only raising like $8 million a year.
Yeah, so that came out today in a story, and I actually went to the PBO website and took a look at what was sent their way. And basically, they get handed a fairly detailed 1 paragraph on kind of what the proposal is, and then from that, they put out a 1-pager with that and where they come out on it. The most interesting thing about the anti-flipping tax is how it's actually proposed to work, which is not clear from the platform at all, but from what they sent to PBO, it's not a surcharge on all house flipping, which is, I think, what most people took as the plain language meaning of we're going to put a tax on house flipping. Instead, it's basically they just want to make it so that if you sell a home within 12 months, you don't get the principal residence capital gains exemption, which is a fairly significant narrowing of that, because a huge amount of the house flipping goes on is more like a business activity and doesn't have people claiming the principal residency exemptions for that.
So it won't work. Or it'll do some stuff, theory, but...
Yeah. So they figure that $8 million is going to be the result of about half the potential people who records show typically sell a home within 12 months of purchasing it and declare the exemption. About half of them would change that behavior. So in theory, it could go up to 16 million. It feels way more narrowly tailored than the basic text of the platform document suggests.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We could spend a lot more time on it, but it's interesting how that changes from the platform into what they've actually costed out. Some of the big things that are costing, though, just to keep us moving along, healthcare, just a lot more money to reduce wait lists, $6 billion, money for a mental health transfer. There's no pharmacare in there, people have noted, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a really odd one to leave out because they've been making slow steps towards that over the last bit since the last election. I think they even had started something before the 2019 one. Yeah, it was around the 2019 election, one side or the other, when they started making moves in that general direction, I think. So it's really odd that they don't just have it as we're going to keep on trucking on with our plans. And, all the other times they mention basically we'll continue to do whatever it is we're doing now as a platform plank.
In the economy section, they talk about $10 a day childcare quite a bit and just continuing to build that out as they promised. I don't think there was anything new in the promise other than just what was in the budget that we've talked about.
Nothing jumped out at me, but I did skim that section pretty quick. They want to extend EI to include gig workers,
which would be good.
Yeah, they want a Canadian Advanced Research Projects Agency, basically Canadian DARPA.
Sure.
Potentially good, could be pretty gimmicky.
Is it going to be an innovation?
So I was going to say that the boys in short pants pointed out on Twitter that the language used to describe that is almost word for word from the Innovation Clusters platform in 2015.
Oh.
So,
well, to be fair, it's better to steal language from your own platform than from lobbyists, like this story about the Uber exec who copied some stuff into the conservative platform.
It isn't quite word for word. I did actually go and look at that, but similar. There's a convergence definitely on we want to stream it into a separate program rather than just extending EI over it. We have a defense research agent. I should know this. There's a defense research agency already for Canada. I think I may have the name slightly off on that. So it's not entirely clear how much CARPA would match DARPA, or it's more civilian targeted. They very clearly draw the analogy to DARPA, which is defense oriented. Anyway, if it was someone other than the Liberals, I'd be, I think, a little more excited.
This is the problem with the Liberal
for
platform,
all the reasons
right?
we just talked about.
It's like a laundry list of things that you're like, oh, those sound neat. I wonder if they'll happen.
Yeah, but for the reasons we just talked about, it feels very gimmicky to me. Whereas, I don't know, if this was some opposition party proposing that, I might perk up and take a little more interest in it.
Another thing that's actually quite interesting is their high earner minimum tax. They posit that there's a need to create a tax floor for people, especially above in the highest tax brackets, where say you're earning a lot of money, but then you max out your deductions and suddenly you're not paying any tax. They say, that's not okay. We're going to create a floor where you just pay 15% tax as a minimum. You can have all your deductions, but they will stop working. So you have to at least pay 15%, which is better than zero, but I wonder if they couldn't have gone higher. But it's a good idea, I think. I don't think any economists have slammed it.
Yeah. There's some other countries that are making moves in that direction. It'll raise some money. It's not. I think PBO put it at. It's going to be about $1.7 billion over the next 5 years, which is not nothing, but also not new program money either.
Yeah, that's where the bank tax comes in, which is what we talked about last week.
That only hits about $5 billion, and is dumb as a concept on how they're planning on executing it. But You can listen to last week's episode for that one. The other interesting item under the economy section that caught my eye was that, or that I may have thrown in the economy section, it might have been put in the affordability thing, is they want to pause student loan payments for parents until their youngest children turn 5. Seems like a pretty good idea.
It's a good incentive for recent grads to have a kid and then 4.5 years later have another one. Although kids are quite expensive, it turns out.
Yeah, like it's not a money maker, but there's a fair bit of research out there on how costs tend to influence how many kids people have, and that generally the number of kids families are having is below where they want to have, and there's a decent amount of evidence that costs play into that. It's a good, like mildly pro-natalist policy, so I like it.
They also want to expand the Canada Workers Benefit, which is good. That's quite I think a lot of progressive economists are pretty excited.
I think economists of all stripes like it. The Conservatives wanted to double it in their platform. Like, it's a pretty universally liked by kind of the econ want world, I think. And there's no like real political valence to it, or partisan valence. On the environmental side, we've talked about the Liberal Climate Plan. Pretty much nothing in my read through it jumped out as immediately different, but I didn't do a side-by-side comparison.
I think I've seen some people on Twitter highlight that it's a little bit faster. Some of the targets are a little bit sooner than they had been previously announced. That's about it.
They want to end plastic waste by 2030, which seems a little optimistic on that, and ban the export of thermal coal by 2030, which is good, but also like I thought it was already in the works, but maybe not. Domestically, we're phasing out coal-powered plants by 2030. I had just assumed that going to also phase out coal exports at that same time, or at least thermal coal, the coal that is used to produce power rather than like coking or metallurgical coal, which is used to produce steel, which will need steel after 2030, but there are definitely other technologies for making electricity that we should definitely be moving towards.
Yeah, on the reconciliation front, they're once again promising to eliminate all clean water advisories. Hopefully this time it happens. And money towards an Indigenous urban, rural, and northern housing strategy, which was in their housing plan. And I think there's additional just money for reaching the TRC recommendations on a number of...
Yeah, I think they're committing to was it the Jordan Principle, I think it is, and a bunch of other stuff in there. I didn't pull out a huge amount in the notes here just because a lot of it is a little vague on what the actual deliverables are, where I've been mostly pulling out stuff that's very kind of deliverables focused. Like they want to, as an example, what's the actual wording here? Something like, confront the legacy of residential schools is one of the platform items in there. But what exactly that means as this is the thing the government is going to do isn't as clear. On the arts and culture front, they promising a bunch of money for a bunch of different things. The one thing that really stood out to me that's good is they want to support the export of Canadian cultural products, which is good. And I've been complaining that nobody's been thinking about this in terms of federal CanCon policy at all. So that is actually really nice to see. We just have
the accidental successes like Schitt's Creek and other shows that go big despite Canadian regulations.
Yeah, so that's really happy to see. And on the off chance the Liberals actually get returned to power, at least they say off chance based on where the campaign's going, who knows, maybe we'll hopefully see it, and the listeners will stop hearing me bang on about it every time we talk about Canadian cultural policy.
Yeah, and I think now every party wants to update CBC's mandate. What they want to update it to differs, but we all agree CBC is not great right now and should be different. We don't know how. But
different for the modern digital age, or where everyone's sitting on. They want to do a Canadian Financial Crimes Agency, which I honestly don't have a strong opinion on whether it's good or bad, or if this is something that should remain with the RCMP. It's an interesting idea. Unlike the US, we don't tend to go for having a bunch of like federal law enforcement agencies that are hyper-specialized, and this might actually be the first. Yeah, I think it is.
There's CBSA, there's CSIS, and the RCMP. That's about
CSIS
it. I know.
Law enforcement, though.
Fair enough. Sticking with law enforcement and guns in specific, they're building up. I think these are previously announced, but they're nuanced details. A mandatory buyback program for prohibited weapons, cracking down on high-capacity magazines, and increasing the gun penalties for smuggling to 14 years from 10, because the Liberals looked at how the Harper era approach to crime work and went, well, that was effective. We will do that. Increasing penalties always decreases crime.
They are also putting some extra resources into CBSA to counter smuggling, which is probably actually the most effective thing there, but they're not clear on what that actually entails money-wise or what the expected outcome is.
Well, this and a couple other things just reminds me that, like, in the previous elections, they talked a lot about repealing Bill C-51 and the conservative stuff on crime strategy, and instead, there's nothing in here about increased CBSA oversight. There's nothing in here really about increasing police oversight other than a little bit regarding sexual abuse allegations in the RCMP and military, which is long overdue and needed, but they do have an RCMP reform section.
Right,
that is in there, but I think it pales in comparison to what activists have been calling for. Like, obviously, the Liberals aren't going to call for a defund or abolish the RCMP, but...
Yeah, because they want to win an election.
But there's not even, like, serious structural reforms posited in here. It's just, we're going to tinker and maybe increase some training, but we'll throw more money at them. And I don't think that's going to fix the problems at that agency.
They are, yeah, so...
and, sorry, it doesn't even live up to their promises in previous elections, was my point.
Yeah, the high-capacity magazine thing is, like a lot of Liberal gun campaign promises, pretty gimmicky in that it's pretty much already illegal now to have a lawn gun magazine that has greater than 5-round capacity. So all they're wanting to do is make the illegal thing already illegal. Which is just like quintessential Liberal gun campaigns.
The Liberal foreign policy section is what you'd expect from a Liberal foreign policy section. They like peace. They like all the, let's just call it what it is, identity politics approach to immigration. People, women, people of color, minority religious, LGBTQ people are persecuted around the world. And so it's nice to see the Liberals throw a nod to making sure that's a priority in immigration streams and in refugee streams. But there's not a lot in terms of specifics in here. There is a commitment to up our support for people fleeing Afghanistan from 20 to 40,000 people.
I was pretty disappointed with this section. It's hard to even call it a foreign policy. Like, it really is just an aid policy more than anything else, and there's a lot more to foreign policy than that. Fundamentally, foreign policy is about how we relate to other countries, and there is pretty much nothing in here except an offhanded line about being against authoritarian states, and no real sense of how we interact with the rest of the world.
You're not excited for the Canadian Centre for Peace, Order and Good Government and all that it will accomplish?
Not at all. I don't know, I think maybe the best way to describe the Liberal foreign policy is like seat at the tableism, that they want to just be there at all the multilateral things, but don't have a real view of what the outcomes of that should be beyond more multilateralism. But like, there are, very significant changes going on in kind of the international order and how major countries relate to each other, and there is just no sign that is even on the Liberal radar in this platform at all, despite the fact that how we navigate those changes is going to be a major foreign policy challenge, probably on par with the Cold War at the very least. Not necessarily it will be a Cold War, but it'll be like that level of significance.
I'm at least positive that they're talking about increasing international development. Let's not knock that meeting the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals is a good thing to include in there. Like, it's not a
really depends
rounded thing, but it's a nice thing to at least see some commitment there.
Yeah, it depends how that actually gets implemented. Depending on the program, a lot of foreign aid money can get thrown at a place and not be hugely successful in generating long-term development or change. So I'd really need to see the details before I'm getting too excited about that the little bit on defense policy they have is they want to modernize NORAD and the Northern Warning System, which was a previous budget commitment. About the only procurement thing in here is expanding our strategic airlift capabilities, which would have been useful when it came to the evacuations from Kabul in the last couple of weeks. I think we have five, maybe four. I think 5 C-17s at the moment, so being able to expand that is good and needed. It'll help with logistics both for military operations and other things like disaster relief, but it's a pretty small slice of the needs to replace a lot of ancient and outdated equipment that the military is operating on now. And that would just be to maintain current operation capabilities rather than even looking at expansion on those. So, very kind of disappointed but unsurprised on what was in there.
I would have been shocked if you were impressed and excited about the Liberal foreign policy, though, and defense policy. Obviously, they also put in there on defense trying to address sexual assault in the Canadian Armed Forces, which is a ongoing and terrible story.
Yeah, and
which has happened under the
appears to be an all-party consensus on that.
Yeah, no one is in favor of sexual assault, thankfully, in 2021.
Unless you're a Liberal candidate.
The other things missing from the platform, they do talk briefly about the overdose crisis. I'll note, we won't have time to get into it, but we should, that over 1,000 people in British Columbia have lost their lives to toxic drug supply in the first half of 2021. The chief coroner had some sharp words for the government today about the provincial government, about their lack of doing anything and just why they weren't even really there to answer questions. I guess the Minister of Mental Health was on vacation, and the Minister of Health or Premier or even Dr. Bonnie Henry did not feel like really answering questions about the 1,000 people who died and what they are doing to stop that. But to bring it back to the Liberal platform, just because we're basically out of time, like they don't mention decriminalization, they don't mention safe supply, they have some like token gestures to do a little bit. It's the same thing we're seeing at all levels, and it's exhausting and people are dying and it's gross. The Liberals also don't touch on electoral reform. That's not as surprising. And I mentioned...
Well, yeah, because we already had the last election when it first passed.
Well, and they decided to not deal with it. What I'm actually more surprised, though, is there's no democratic reform at all in any way. There's nothing to deal with committees. There's nothing to deal with the Senate. There's minimal stuff around the courts. Like they are committing to the Law Reform Commission, but there's nothing about appointing more judges.
Yeah, they also want to increase the court challenges program, which I'm not a huge fan of.
As a charity that's looking to apply for those grants, I am a interested fan of it, and I would love to see it apply to provincial jurisdiction as well, but I guess that's someone else I need to ask for.
It strikes me as a little perverse for the government to be funding lawsuits against itself. But yeah, that's probably a debate when we haven't gone over time on our recording. That's probably quite in depth.
But yeah, so overall, like I said off the top, the Liberal platform is what you would expect. No real big surprises. If you like the Liberals, you will like this platform. Yeah.
What I'm surprised to not see in here is kind of a big idea. There was reporting a couple weeks ago, I think first weekend of the election, that the Liberals were looking for their big thing. Looks like they never found one, which I'm a little surprised about. Maybe they truly are out of ideas, but from a strategic point of view, having an idea of what you need the election to be about would at least stop the Liberal bleeding on the issue. I'm surprised they couldn't come up with one to include here.
It turns out there's only 5 people who do Canadian politics very well in this country, and I think the Liberals just didn't have any of them on staff this time around. They all got swooped up by the other teams, or they were busy in the other elections that have happened recently, or they were just on vacation. So if you don't have one of the 5 people who know what they're doing, you end up calling an election for no reason. But maybe we'll find out what that reason is at the debate next week. Come watch it with us, and then come watch us talk about it 8:30 p.m. Pacific time, politicos.ca/debate. We'll see you there.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca.
Support the show and get access to our Slack channel at patreon.com/playtoast. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Playtoast is a production of Legend Boot Media, and editing services are provided by CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Wash your hands and stay home. Thanks for listening.